Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started now. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. We're pleased you're joining us today. Actually, could you advance? Sorry, next one. All right. So just a couple of things about today's webinar. If you need closed captioning, there is a link in the chat box you can click on. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording, to the presentation slides, and any other resources mentioned in this webinar in about a week. The audience will have an opportunity to ask questions to any member of the presentation panel during the last 10 minutes of this webinar. So if you have questions, jot them down, and you'll be able to ask them at the end. Medical librarians can receive 1 CE credit for attending this webinar. Completing an evaluation at the end of the webinar is required to receive the credit. The webinar evaluation should appear automatically after you leave the WebEx session. And even if you're not getting credit for this, if you would like to give us feedback, we love to hear from you. If you could fill out an evaluation, we'd appreciate it. I'm your host, Susan Halpin. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the New England region of the National Network of Libraries of Medicine. My office is located at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in Worcester, Mass. In the next few slides, I'm going to be giving just a quick overview of the National Library of Medicine and our outreach program. So while I'm going over that, if you would like to introduce yourself, I'm sure all of us would like to see who's joining us this afternoon. Tell us your name, where you're located, and what you hope to learn today, and you can do that in the chat box. Make sure you're chatting to all. All right, so a little bit about the National Library of Medicine. The NLM is a physical library located on the campus of the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. It's the largest biomedical library in the world and one of the federal government's largest providers of digital content. All of the information from the NLM is available online and anyone can access it. There is no cost to use any of our online resources, databases, tools, or websites. The mission of the NLM is to advance the progress of medicine and improve public health by making trustworthy health and medical information accessible to everyone. The NLM carries out its mission through a national network that has more than 7,500 members across the United States. This webinar is being presented through the New England region, or the NER for short. There are 7 other regions across the country that provide similar outreach with online health and medical information, training, and also grant funding. Those who use our resources form our network, and network members come from many different backgrounds and professions. For example, those registered for this webinar today are librarians, healthcare providers, public health professionals, educators, students, researchers, first responders, law enforcement, and members of the general public. Anyone can join the network and receive information about the training we offer, and the training we offer is also free. NLM also provides grant funding to organizations that further the NLM mission, and over the past few years, the New England region has funded about $150,000 for substance use disorder related programs and projects in New England. The NLM network provided training to about 77,000 people last year. The NLM provides an extensive amount and a wide variety of information about how to prevent and treat substance use disorder. NLM resources do not contain any advertising. They're written by medical experts and they're updated on a regular basis, and you don't need an account to use them. This slide shows 2 NLM sites that are a good place to start if you're looking for evidence-based health and medical information about addiction or substance use disorder. On the left is a picture of NLM's consumer health website called Medline Plus, and the page pictured is what you would receive if you did a search for opioid addiction on the home page of Medline Plus. On the right side is a picture of the NLM opioid and addiction treatment portal, and that has a vast amount of information available, subjects like opioid prescribing, treating opioid addiction. There's even information about data, trends, and statistics. You will receive links to all of the resources mentioned in this webinar as part of a comprehensive resource list that will come with the recording link. It takes about a week for me to send that recording link out to you. I just wanted to highlight one of NLM's resources that's very handy. It's called Pillbox, and it's a useful online site that provides data and images for prescription, over-the-counter, homeopathic, and veterinary pills marketed in the United States. This website can help you identify a pill if you were to find an unknown pill like on the floor. It contains information about pills such as how they look, their active and inactive ingredients, and conditions that the medication is used to treat. If you're looking for a programming tool for teens through adults, the NNLM-NER has a book club kit that you can order. The information about how to find out more about this opportunity is on this slide, and you can look at it when you receive your slides for the webinar. All right, this webinar has the following objectives. You're going to learn about what a recovery high school is. We're going to identify some root causes of addiction. We'll explain the roles of genetic predisposition and the choice in the disease of addiction. We'll help you understand how public schools can be a place where teens first obtain addictive substances. There will be ideas to help formulate a plan to address peer pressure and addictive substance use in your youth program or school. You will learn how to provide support and resources to students using addictive substances, and you will recognize how to be more effective in the prevention and treatment of addiction as a parent, healthcare provider, librarian, educator, first responder, and law enforcement professional when you're engaging with someone with a substance use disorder. So now I'm just going to turn this slide over to Mary Ellen McGorry, and she's going to explain what a recovery high school is.
Thanks, Susan. Recovery high schools are secondary schools that are designed specifically to support students in recovery from substance use disorders or dependency. Students must have a diagnosed substance use disorder and be willing to commit to a program of recovery to be admitted. The goals of recovery high schools are to provide a safe and supportive environment where all students can focus on their recovery and academics, to educate all enrolled students who are working toward recovery from substance use disorder and any co-occurring disorders such as anxiety, depression, ADHD, or trauma. We work with the sending districts to meet state requirements so the students can earn a high school diploma. We support students in their recovery and their academics. We are staffed with a principal, recovery clinician, guidance counselor, and teachers in English, math, social studies, and science. And recovery high schools also provide supports to families learning to live with and provide support for their teens entering the recovery lifestyle.
Great. I'm Dr. Margaret Chang, and I just wanted to take a brief minute to say thank you to some of the sponsors for our webinar, So this entire collaboration was actually brought about because there was a dearth of, especially at the time, a couple of years ago, materials related to adolescent substance use. So I wanted to extend thank you to the American Academy of Pediatrics, specifically the Community Access to Child Health Grant, who funded a lot of the video production, as well as the collaboration we had with Recovery High School, and also the American Psychiatric Association Helping Hands Grant, that also funded a lot of the collaborations we've been successful and fortunate to have with Recovery High School. And lastly, kind of a formal thank you as well to Michael Laramie, who is our videographer here.
Thank you. Sure.
So you've met a couple of our presenters on this team, but now you'll meet them a little more formally as they introduce themselves to you.
I'm Mary Ellen Ligori, and I'm the principal at Rockdale Recovery High School. And I would just like to say that our student Sam is unavailable to be with us today. So we have John, a Rockdale Recovery High School student, who has agreed to fill in.
Hi, I'm John.
My name is Alyssa Richard Figueroa. I'm the recovery clinician at Rockdale Recovery High School.
I'm Dr. Margaret Chang. I am a general practice pediatrician as well as an internist. I practice at Tri-River Family Health Center in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, and I'm affiliated with University of Massachusetts Medical School.
And my name is Michael Laramie, and I run a videography business and help nonprofits to just create videos that will actually help them and promote their causes.
I feel very fortunate to work with such a dedicated team who are all exceptionally busy, but graciously were willing to share their time and work with all of us.
So now we're going to look at a clip and learn what factors increase the risk for addiction. This will include early exposure and use, genetic predisposition and trauma, and peer, school, and choice.
One root cause or risk factor that I notice in my clinical practice is the early exposure in the home to families using substances. Growing up, early childhood years, birth through, 5, for an example, these children are exposed to their caregivers either using substances in front of them, being under the influences of substances in front of them, sometimes overdosing on substances in front of them, being unable to function because they're withdrawing from substances in front of them, maybe not taking care of their needs in terms of food, shelter, clothing because of parents' use of substances. And we do see that has a drastic impact on the risk factors for these individuals developing substance use disorders in their future. One other risk factor that we see, or one other root cause of addiction, is early childhood trauma. Things such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, witnessing domestic violence or community violence. And we find that some people that do have those experiences and exposures turn to substances to kind of mask and deal with those internal symptoms of anxiety, of flashbacks, of nightmares, of constant feelings of worry or dread or anger, all of these symptoms that we find with post-traumatic stress disorder. Substances tend to be a go-to to deal with those. And when we're not treating our post-traumatic stress disorder through therapy and psychiatric med management, and we're using substances to deal with that, it's a quick track to developing a substance use disorder.
I was given to my grandparents. I knew I didn't have like a mom and a dad growing up. Like I knew that I had them, but they weren't there. And I knew that. And I also knew why, because my grandmother always educated me and always warned me hey, this is what's going on. I never want your life to be like that. I remember going to school as a little kid and seeing other kids' parents pick them up from school and going home crying because my parents didn't pick me up. I didn't have the mom and dad figure except for when I was with my grandparents. And I grew up with them. I feel like my very first time realizing was driving my mom to rehab with my grandmother and having to drop her off and just crying the whole way home. I didn't know where they were, but I knew what was going on. And I was never left confused. I was never left with like questions. Like, I think my grandparents really helped me a lot through that situation. I do always remember thinking to myself, what's so good about it that you can walk away from your own children? Like, what is it about it? Like, I have to know. It's not like I went and tried what they were doing right away, but like, I definitely started to experiment, and it just went all downhill from there. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't be an addict if my parents didn't use, but it definitely did a great deal.
My mom got pregnant with me early on. I think she was 17. The mayhem of the household kind of was bothersome for my mom. She didn't want to raise a child around drugs and alcohol. My father kept getting arrested and put in jail. She had given him a warning. I was probably 1 year old at the time, and he had gotten locked up again, and she up and left. We moved away. I had my mother's house, and there was really no drinking or behavior out of the ordinary there, but it was a very different atmosphere at my father's house now. My first memory of anything of that sort was at my father's house. My uncle had come in with a bottle of what I believe to be butterscotch brandy or whatever, and it was in a glass bottle. It was tall and green. I remember sitting at the table, and he's like, you guys want some? And we're like, yeah. When I was a kid, I was probably about 4 or 5, I want to say. I remember taking the shot, and it went down like candy. It tasted really good. And then he offered another, and then I remember taking another and enjoyed it. I didn't give it much thought, but I knew what alcohol was. I knew vaguely what drugs were. I can remember one time I had come into my father's room while I was there to ask him a question, and there was a 20-ounce bottle of soda with a straw sticking out of it. And I couldn't really identify what it was, but I knew in my mind it had something to do with drugs. I thought they were making drugs. Later on in life, when I became an active user myself, I identified it as a crack pipe. Whenever I was there, I kind of took care of myself. At a young age, I'd have to shower myself. If I didn't, I'd come home after 4 days to my mother, and she'd be like, I'd be a mess, like dirty, not change my clothes for days. That was the kind of atmosphere it was. It really was just there. And my dad was a really kind man. He never really did anything to put me in harm's way other than, he used around me, but they kept it kind of hush-hush. Like, it wasn't to the point where it was overly bothersome to me or made me feel uncomfortable. I kind of just gave it like, yeah, this is what it is. Like, it was around me enough where it was just kind of normal.
I remember when I was 4, when my dad was sober, he was the nicest man. He always made sure we had everything we needed. He was good to my mother, but the minute he would drink, he turned into a monster. He would always beat up my mom. I would hear my mom and dad fighting, and we would hide because we didn't know, who my dad would lash out at, who he would hit. Like, I remember hiding in a closet. I can tell you, like, the closet, they had a slanted roof, and there was some toys in there that would be where, the bigger toys, my mom would say, put them in there when you're not playing with them. And I remember my sisters and brothers, being there for us. I was potty trained, but I remember waking up and I was afraid to go downstairs because I didn't know what was going to be down there. So I'd just pee on the bed, things like that. Sneaking out of the house, people coming and taking us and trying to keep us safe. All that came at the age of 3 or 4. Like, that was traumatic to me.
One of the root causes of addiction is the genetic predisposition. The individual's chemical makeup in their body is predisposed to developing this habitual use behavior. Typically, we find that through direct family members like parents, grandparents. Since I was little enough to understand, my grandmother always told me, like, your parents make bad decisions. They do drugs. Drugs are bad. I was never left confused. I was never left with, questions. Like,
I think my grandparents really helped me a lot through that situation. I was always told growing up that I had the gene, I had the disease. Even if I'm not using, I'm an addict. Like, it's in my blood, it's there. And I shouldn't experiment because the second I touch something, it's gonna be game on. She always made sure I knew that this addiction was a disease and it wasn't something that could be controlled once started. And she just told me that my mom has it, she has it, my dad has it, my grandfather has it, everybody has it. Like, it's bound to be in me. And like, it's very, I guess it was almost difficult for her to explain that to a kid. She would tell me that to just not try it because it's not worth it. It's not worth throwing everything away. It's not worth not having like actual joy in life. You know what I'm saying? Because like, my parents would come around every once in a while, but they never seemed happy.
My mother's father was a drunk. We would ask him for ice cream. He loved sherbet ice cream and vodka. But we would ask for ice cream. He'd put it in our hands when we were very young, maybe 2 or 3, and we'd lick it out of our hands. And my dad's dad, I did not know him at all, but I know that he was a drunk. My father is an alcoholic and struggles with it to this day. There's definite strand, the whole 5 generations before me was definitely involved in alcohol in a strong way. I mean, it's been a part of my family's life for a long time. There are cousins that have overdosed. There are cousins that still use today. Most of my brothers and sisters are involved with drug abuse in some way. My uncles, all of them, and some of them have come to their demise based around drugs and alcohol. And unfortunate situations happen where they are looking at, serious consequences because of drugs and alcohol. It's just an ongoing thing. So like just to sum it up real shortly, like, my mom's dad is an alcoholic. His dad was probably an alcoholic. My mom was susceptible to it, just never picked up. My dad is an alcoholic. His dad was an alcoholic. His brothers are all alcoholics, literally all of them. And then you have my daughter now, because I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery, but for years and years I've struggled with it, and now my daughter had some experience with it.
I know I'm an alcoholic because how can it miss me? In a whole family, 9 kids, my oldest sister is able to make a choice, but she has a different father. That makes a difference. Then the next sister down is, the 2 older sisters have a different father, same mother. So the oldest sister made a choice, like, she can drink and put it away. The next sister down, who has a different father, she is a complete drug addict, alcoholic. Then it starts with my mother's, was married twice. So the first marriage is the 2 sisters. Then we come to the oldest brother who was married with my father. He is exactly like my father, exactly. Nice guy, will do whatever he could for you, give him some alcohol or give him some drugs, and he's a monster. And he passed away from his illness, from his disease, his drug and alcohol disease. Then you have the sister that comes after him. She's a drug addict and alcoholic, and she has post-traumatic stress. Then we have the next brother. He complete drug addict, alcoholic. He died when he was 55 from his disease. Then we have my sister, who was, she was born handicapped. She died when she was 22. She obviously didn't have any issues with drugs and alcohol. She had, disabilities. Then there's me. I chose not to, absolutely not to, use any kind of drug or alcohol. My brother younger than me, raging alcoholic, drug addict, he's in jail.
Another risk factor that we think about when we're talking about developing substance use disorders is the peer and social exposure in times such as middle school or high school, when they're starting to kind of identify who are they, who do they want to hang out with, what kind of social relationships do they want to create. Having peers surrounding them that either glorify or accept substance use or introduce these individuals to substance use, that has a greater impact. And we also know that the longer a person can wait for that first try, so for an example, if someone can wait till being 18 years old before they try substances for the first time, that has a significant impact on their developing an addiction or not. They're less likely, if they're older, to develop an addiction versus students that might have tried it 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, much more likely to develop a use disorder.
When I got into middle school, I feel like my whole life changed around for the worst. I was definitely shown what weed was. I was shown all these different things, and everybody was just doing it. And I feel like a huge part of it was curiosity, and I wouldn't say peer pressure, but also like doing it to feel cool or like act cool in front of other people. I feel like that was just what was around in middle school. There was never any like harder stuff. It was just pot everywhere all the time. And I feel like that's what, like, I started smoking, I think 7th grade going into 8th grade. When I first started, I knew that you couldn't physically get addicted to marijuana. So therefore, I was like, all right, this is something I can't get addicted to, it's impossible. I feel mentally, because I used it as a coping skill, it is. It was just one thing led to another. I wasn't with a good group of people. I wasn't in a good state of mind. This was a lot later in my pot scandal. Like I smoked for about a couple of years, and then I realized what triple C's and pills and all that could make me feel so much better. And like I felt like the biggest thing after pot was definitely triple C's. Cough, cold, and congestion. It's like a cough medicine pill. I would do them every day. It was crazy. And like triple C's is like the same effect of being drunk almost, but not as intense, and you wouldn't wake up with a hangover. So I thought, hey, like this is awesome. I didn't think it would come up in P-test because it's something that you could get at CVS. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so available. I mean, I was never really deep into hardcore stuff, but I feel like for me, it's not about what you took, it's about how it affected your life. Like I could have gone through this whole thing just on pot, and everything could have still been the same. I believe once I got to high school, it was the biggest change in my life. It was like a slap in the face. It was like absolutely insane. It opened my eyes to so many different drugs, and everybody doing acid or shrooms or coke or all this stuff, and I just wanted to, like deep down inside, I wanted to try it all, but also at the same time I wanted to hide in the corner and cry, because I knew that if I put my hands on any of it, that's it, my life's over. And it was already getting to the point of being destroyed with what I was already using. For example, going to parties, you can't go to a single party without there being lines of coke all over the table. You can't go over a friend's house without somebody drinking. It was all over school. It was before school, during school, after school, during lunch, during gym, during math, during English. It was everywhere. Every 2 seconds somebody would ask me, hey, you want to go skip and go smoke or go do like this or that or what in the next thing? And like I was just in such a terrible mental state of mind and already deep into pot and triple C's. Right before I walk in the door, somebody asked me, hey, before you walk in, do you want to walk down to Newton Square or Elm Park or something and smoke? I would come into school smelling like pot and looking high as hell, and nobody would say anything to me, not a single teacher. I can get texts during school and be like, hey, come to the bathroom, and then we'll sneak out real quick and come right back. Nobody will know. Like there's this one hallway where you can leave and there's like no cameras, and you just leave and it leads you straight to the woods, and you just go in the woods and do your business and come right back in. The door's unlocked.
I didn't really know how to take middle school. I became kind of, instead of being the bully, I kind of became bullied because I didn't know where I fit in. It was a bigger school, there was a lot more kids from a lot more neighborhoods and things like that. It was very awkward for me. I was a very awkward kid at that time. I really didn't know where my place was. Right before high school or during high school is where I first picked up like marijuana. and then it led to a drink right away. But those two things opened up a door for me as far as getting friends. I can remember, that I started to actually meet people and hang out with people based around weed and drink. And that's what we would do. So like it became like an every weekend thing. I would try to see how much money I could come with on a Friday, because the more money I had, more alcohol I had, more drugs I had, the more friends I'd have around me. And we would go into the woods in the town I was in, and we would all just like burn pallets and hang around, and like we would fight with each other. Like fights would break out, and the next day we'd be friends again. But like that's what we did on the weekends. There wasn't really much else that we were interested in. And I can say now that like I went into the woods at like 14 years old with my friends to drink, and as time went on, my friends moved on with their lives. They would go and get jobs, and they would have girlfriends, and they would go to college. And I went in the woods at 14, and I didn't come out until 37.
I had some friends, and I was about 15, and they were drinking. They were drinking beer. And I took one of the beers. This was when I made the choice. I had a beer, and I took a drink of it, and I really didn't like it. And then I was thinking, I was looking at it, and we were on a bridge where there was water, and we were just hanging out, laughing. And I looked at the beer, and I threw it into the water, and I said, if I drink, I'm going to look like my dad, and I'm going to smell like my dad, and I can't do that.
Now we're going to look at what factors increase the risk of addiction, what treatments and supports work, including honesty, understanding emotions and mental health, the importance of a new lifestyle, and access to services.
One of the biggest challenges that we find when working with this group of teens is honesty. First and foremost is if they can be honest with themselves about whether or not they even have a struggle with substance use. That's kind of the first step, and that's one of the most challenging steps, I think, for anyone, teenager or adult, when we think of treatment for addiction. How does this substance impact my life? And we find that that's tough, because if we're honest about that relationship, that impact on the substances on our lives and on our families and friends and functioning in different domains like school and work and being safe in the community, if we're honest about that, we might actually have to change our behavior, which is a huge ask of people.
When I say we run an honest program, I mean is like for our clinicians and our principal. If you mess up, say over the weekend you went to a party, you messed up, you relapsed. If you come in the next day and you say, hey, listen, I went to a party, I messed up, I relapsed, I want to talk about it, work through it, maybe make a relapse prevention plan, they will do that with you. They're not going to sit there and be like, oh, well, you need to go to detox, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. If you're truthful to them, if you are honest, they can handle it. What they can't handle is the lies. They can handle any truth, no lies.
One of the things that we find to be the most helpful when tackling the challenge of honesty is trying to approach the student in a non-judgmental way and get to the root cause of what is causing that student to avoid the honesty or to engage in lying behavior. There tends to be a reason, right? Whether or not that is shame, fear, embarrassment, guilt. Maybe it's even that they think that if they're honest, they're going to get in trouble for something. Being able to take that time, it is a lengthy process to be able to sit down with a student, a timely process to give them that attention and help them figure out what are those barriers to being honest.
One time I was at school and my grandmother went through my room and found all my empty CCC packets and called the school, and they sat me down and we worked through what would be the best for me going forward, if I should go into a treatment, if I should go into more counseling. If they really give you all those resources that you need, they helped me calm down, because if I were to just go home and Nana were to be like, hey, I found all this, I would freak out. They helped me calm down, they helped me collect myself, know that it's okay, I'm in a safe environment. And like normal situations like that, my anxiety would be through the roof, but like they really helped a lot. they kind of helped me understand, like, hey, you're not in trouble, you're sick, you need help. That was one thing that I needed to understand for a long time. Instead of hating myself for what I was doing, I needed to understand that I was sick, and I needed.
One of the other important things in relation to honesty is whether or not I believe them, and being able to call out that individual on, whether or not they're being honest. I find that a lot of people might tend to kind of go with the least challenging or the least resistant option by just believing the individual or saying that they believe the individual, even if they, as the clinician inside, kind of feels like there's something not quite right about this. What I find is that to be completely unhelpful in terms of that treatment process for the person struggling with being honest. Being able to be blunt and call them out when maybe they're telling you information that's not congruent with information that you already had, and not letting them just continue to perpetuate those lies. For an example, we have a student here who's typically a very honest student, who we did have an experience with recently lying about a relapse over the weekend. Initially, she lied about whether or not she used in front of a peer group, and it took till later on in the day for me to take time out and sit down with her one-on-one to get to the truth that she did struggle over the weekend, that she did relapse over the weekend. And the cause of her not being honest with me about that was because when we had that initial discussion, it was in front of her peers, and she was embarrassed about her relapse given how well she had been. One of the other biggest challenges that I find with working with the adolescent substance use population is this free time that they have. What do we do now that we put the drinks and drugs down? Typically speaking, prior to entering recovery, they associated much of their free time with substance use or activities related to getting substances, using substances, recovering from substance use. So now that they're in recovery and they're sober, what do we do with our free time? That's one of the biggest challenges for these kids, identifying what do they like, what brings them enjoyment, what do they have access to. One of the things that we do here at Rockdale Recovery High School to deal with that challenge of what do we do with our free time now that drinks and drugs are gone is during our group process, we try to give them information about different leisure or recreational activities that are available to them in the community, whether it's things like going on hikes, which are free and readily available to them, or joining a gym, or finding a job, or something like that. What kind of structure can we put in place to take some of that free time so that we're less likely to sit in our own thoughts and think about using? For an example, we have a student here who's lacking day structure for the summer break months. So one of the ways that we're trying to support her through that is by placing a referral into one of our area's job support agencies. So they will meet with her and help one-on-one counseling related to job skills, as well as helping her start the process of getting a paid internship for the summer so that she can have structure throughout her day and also get a little income as well, which is always helpful for the younger kids.
Something I'm thinking about doing is definitely going to Quinsigamond Community College. I'm going to be doing EMT training. I'm interested in being an EMT because they're all about saving people's lives and turning other people's lives around. That's something that I would love to do.
Now we're going to look at how can we be more effective with prevention and treatment, what is the most helpful, insights for medical professionals, insights for educators, and insights for law enforcement.
One piece of advice that I would give to anyone working in the medical or treatment community would be to approach these students with a non-judgmental tone. They tend to be pretty sensitive to any perceived judgment, so the way that you ask a question does matter, whether there's this kind of negative connotation associated with it. So for an example, instead of asking, "You don't do drugs, right?" Normalize it a little bit more. I know that adolescents might start experimenting with things like tobacco, alcohol, or marijuana. I'm just wondering if that's true for you, or if any of your friends have started trying any of that kind of stuff. So the latter version has none of that negative connotation to it. So it's not that they're not gonna lie, they might still lie, but they're more likely to be honest because they don't think that their answer is gonna affect my opinion of them.
One thing I wish counselors understood is that at a young age, if I feel comfortable telling you something, that should just stay between me and you, or I won't feel comfortable anymore. Like, don't disclose my information just because I'm a minor. That's still my information.
One thing that I would like teachers to understand about teens that struggle with substance use is that they're not bad kids, and that there's probably much more going on than the teacher is able to see just based on that student's presentation in their classroom. That there's a reason why they're using substances, and it's not because they're a delinquent or a bad kid, that they're struggling with something, and the substance use is a manifestation of that struggle. Try not to judge them and try to support them through that.
We're not bad people. Like, I feel like one of the biggest misconceptions is that people feel like we're terrible people because we do these things, and that's not it. We're not bad people, we just make bad decisions. One thing I wish teachers knew is that it's not normal for a kid to come in high on pot every single day. It's not normal for a kid to think that they need to be high to get through the school day. That's not normal. That's addiction. That's, like, I wish teachers knew that, like, it's very relevant in high school. It's so common. Like, some people don't even know about Recovery High who wish they did.
Teachers have a stigma, and when you're bad, you're bad. It's like, and I'm a daycare provider, so I can see it. It's hard. It's hard to want to love and want to help a kid who is a pain in the ass. And that kid is usually the kid that needs you the most. You know what I mean? Like, you want to, like, ugh, but they need you because they're lacking.
A piece of advice that I would give to law enforcement is to try not to take any negative interactions with individuals struggling with substance use in the community personally. Many of these individuals are only interacting with you in a state of crisis, such as post-overdose or in response to a domestic violence situation in the community. So they're first and foremost, their frontal lobes are not working in a way in which they're supposed to, which impacts impulse control, rational thought, decision making, emotional regulation, all of those big important areas of personal control, that kind of stuff. So I would try not to take any of their reactions personally, and to approach them as clear-headed and kind of detached from the situation as you can be, so that you can interact with them as professionally as possible. Also keep in mind that their prior experiences have maybe not been so pleasant with the police, so that also has an impact on how they might react to you. And having that awareness might be able to better prepare you for these future interactions with individuals.
One thing I wish police officers knew is if they were to find somebody with drugs on them, I think they should give more resources instead of just arresting people for having stuff on them. I think they should really be more aware of addiction and not just arrest people for being high, like give them resources to use. I also wish they knew that we weren't bad people.
One of the biggest reasons I feel that I struggle is from my past history, the wreckage of the past, things I've done, things I've been through, things I've put other people through. Those things are alive and well in my heart and mind, and they always seem to bring me back to that negative thinking, the negative behavior, like resentment and things like that. Remorse, guilt, shame. Some of the stuff I've done that, out there is just not normal. The things we do to get more, panhandling and robbing and stealing and boosting and taking advantage of people, stealing people's stuff and helping them look for it. I was just living to use and using to live. And that's what it became. So all that stuff that I did to people, like stealing from family, stealing from my kids, stealing from girlfriends, just being violent out in the community to get what I wanted. And that stuff, when you get sober, lives in your heart and in your mind. And it plays a toll on you, because if you have any kind of conscience, this stuff's gonna bother you, and it does. Living with that stuff, it's important, you know, I think that's what takes me out, basically.
When it comes to police, I wish people could understand that if you don't give them a hard time, it won't escalate. If you, yes sir, no sir, and give them the respect that they earned, most of them have earned. Not everybody is a saint, but most police officers are there to help you. And if you just do what they ask, they do not have to get rough. You know, if you struggle, they have to think about them going home to their families.
All right, now we're going to open up the opportunity for you to ask questions to any of the presenters. So you can put those questions into the chat box, and while you're typing, Margaret is going to give us a question she gets frequently.
Excellent. Yeah, so I am coming to this webinar mainly from the standpoint of primary care, and you know, the setting where I practice, there are a lot of primary care providers that face this dilemma, which is, I think, once you have identified an adolescent with issues around substance use, what do? You know, once you actually, they disclose because you're kind of that really honest person that they can come to, you know, where do I send these people? You know, and I think for me, learning about Recovery High School was really kind of an eye-opening moment, because from my perspective, I never learned about such resources. And so, you know, I think to get the question session started, my question would be, all right, you know, it seems like this Recovery High School model is great. How do people like me access it? So I'm going to kind of turn the floor over to Mary Ellen and Alyssa.
Oh, we are fortunate and getting more fortunate that many of the community providers in the Worcester area here are becoming aware. We beat the pavement, we go to provider fairs, we go to middle schools and high schools and present, making the community and particularly the schools aware that we exist, what services we can provide, and that we're there to help them.
And in terms of how to access our services, it's, at least for our school at Rockdale Recovery High School in Worcester, it's fairly simple. They just need the contact number. They just need to pick up the phone, reach out, give us a phone call, and set up a meeting with us. And then things tend to go smoothly from there.
And one of the biggest things I think I'd like to say about working with these students is some of the recovery high schools run slightly differently. Some are abstinence-based, others are harm reduction. We are harm reduction, so we meet our kids where they're at. And as Alyssa had said in the slides, there's no judgment. We provide the supports that they need to try to keep them on a path to recovery and nice, long, healthy, happy lives.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and just continue with some questions, just to spark discussion amongst all of us. So, you know, I think another big thing that I know I have issues with kind of taking care of adolescents and young adults in a primary care setting suffering from addiction is how to handle the stigma around actually getting treatment, excuse me. You know, and I know for me, that's been, you know, a major issue as to kind of what to sort of think about and say. I think in addition for me as a provider, when I talk to someone about maybe it's time to seek treatment,
you know, there's a lot of hesitancy, and I think anyone seeing these videos today can understand why. So I'm going to kind of open it up, again, to Mary Ellen and Alyssa, and perhaps to John as well, if you want to share thoughts around kind of stigma and treatment.
I think, unfortunately, the stigma still exists in the greater public, you know, and what Alyssa said in the video clips is absolutely right. These are not bad kids, they're sick kids trying to get well. And, you know, these are behaviors that they've seen in their parents and their grandparents, so it's normal to them unless and until they are exposed to something different. If you have cupcakes after dinner at your house, that's normal. If you watch grandma shoot up heroin after dinner at your house, that's normal. Unless you're exposed to something else, that is what you know. So I think for a lot of our kids, the stigma still exists, but the reality is that they wanted to live, and they realized that if they continued on the path that they were on, stigma or not, they would die.
Yeah, just to kind of second what Mary Ellen's last thought was, one of the things that I try to do in my practice with clients is try to beat that stigma with reality. So yes, it might feel you might be feeling some way about yourself if you're admitting that you have a problem, and you might not want to like identify as that stereotypical drug-addicted individual. However, the reality of the situation is, you know, that is what's going on. And if you don't decide to go get help for that, where is that, what's that outcome going to look like for you? So one of the things that we often talk about is, you know, addiction is a progressive disease, and if you don't get treatment for it, you're going to wind up in 3 places, jail, institutions, or death. So being very forthcoming with that, blunt about that, reality-based about that, can sometimes help that individual overcome that fear of being stigmatized, or you know, that resistance to wanting to identify as that stereotype that they don't want to be.
And one last thing that Alyssa just sparked, this is Mary Ellen again, that I personally observe and believe that a lot of adolescents and young adults have zero coping skills, zero ability to sit with a feeling, sit in the discomfort, and everything today is instant. You know, the phones and the videos and everything is instant. So when they're using, the high is instant, so I don't feel what I'm feeling. But the recovery process is anything but instant. It's a process. It's a day by day by day process. And for a lot of kids, it's hard to accept and acknowledge that because everything else is so instantaneous for them. So we work really hard on trying to develop coping skills, letting these kids know that, you know, you have a feeling, it's a feeling. You have a craving, it's a craving, unless and until you take steps to further, you know, that action, it's just a craving. And being able to sit with it.
Okay.
Do you think, so is there any?
We have another question here. Any suggestions on how to support a child who is caught experimenting with substances?
Yeah, John.
Yeah.
Switch, good, jump in there. Good. I wanted him to talk.
Oh, can you repeat the question?
So any suggestions on how to support a child who is caught experimenting with substances?
Yeah, I would say to definitely not like yell at them. I would say be understanding, figure out why they're doing what they're doing, and get to the bottom of it. Because if you just like try to immediately punish them and are harsh on them, they're not going to be honest with you.
I would also add, you know, trying to educate them about what the consequences of continuing to use that substance could be. So, you know, it could be something as, you know, marijuana. Samantha in the videos had talked about that being her kind of first experience with substance use and how normalized it was for her. But the reality is that that can progress into something else, and kind of also, you know, not fear tactics. Don't lie about what, you know, the substance could do. It would not be beneficial to say that marijuana you could have a fatal overdose off of, because that's just a lie and they're not going to trust what you have to say. However, bringing to their awareness that that could progress into something that's much more extreme, much more dangerous, that even if it's not something you can fatally overdose off of, it still can impact your life in very negative ways, can help, interfere with your ability to function in school, your relationships with your peers, your loved ones. It can interfere with your ability to get a job. You can still get in trouble with the law and end up being, on probation or arrested or, any of that kind of stuff. So being honest around it, but also educate them, and trying to be a little bit understanding, like John was saying, about why did they choose that decision, and what's going on, and trying to help them see that that's not something that they're going to want to continue to do over and over again.
All right. So, you know what? We're just trying to get on the right slide. So it's slide 29, I think. Oh, 28. Sorry. No. Oh, all right. So in your packet, you will have the contact information for the presenters. I just want to say a special thanks to Sam and her family for sharing their family stories with us. Oh, it looks like we have another question. You know what?
Long answer, short answer.
How can you educate your children on reevaluating their peer relationships that may encourage substance use?
Yeah, I think that's a really complicated question, honestly. I think it starts really with, at the very beginning, having open, honest communication with your child from an early age, and letting them know, what your experience has been, what you know to be factual. Again, trying that non-judgmental approach to it, finding out what they like about their peers, why do they want to hang out with those peers, but also being upfront about what your concerns are, and why you would be worried about their continued friendship with this particular individual if you feel like that's kind of what has led them into making, less, poorer decisions, or decisions that have higher risk level consequences to them, but also doing so in a way that doesn't make them get defensive around it or feel like you're attacking their friend because that's someone that's clearly important to them as well in their life. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Thank you everyone who attended today. If you are planning to get continuing ed credits, the evaluation should pop up at the very end when you exit the webinar, and I put the enrollment code in the chat box. And Michael, can you just advance one more? So we have another webinar coming up. The presenter is from a documentary called Beyond the Wall, and his name is Louis Diaz, and he works for the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, and he works with those who are incarcerated and those who are returning to the community after incarceration, and he's going to share his work and his experiences with us. So I will put the registration link in the chat box, and you guys can also go on to the NNLM website and register there. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. I think we're going to end here. All right, goodbye now.